Hi. Okay, so we're going to continue on talking about fallacies, and let's get to it right now. Persuasive speaking for my public speaking class. Here we go. Logical fallacies. Okay, so fallacy is basically what we call erroneous reasoning. There's an error in the reasoning process. It's false, it's invalid. Sometimes it's deceptive. It depends on, who the person is doing it, if they're actually intentionally trying to be deceptive. We hear this kind of reasoning all the time, especially now with the great divide between in our country. You can hear it right now that's happening in terms of if you're on the side of thinking that we should be released from the pandemic right now, and you think that the government's taking away our rights, right? There's a whole argument on that side. And then there's an argument against it, right? And to look at where's the fallacies, what's reasoning. So your job is to try to not have them as you're writing your speech and giving your speech. And it's especially evident or important that you do that in your persuasive speech. It's important in all speeches, but as you're building an argument, it's important for you to recognize, are you developing, or are you presenting fallacious reasoning? And I can honestly tell you that in a few of the claims that you all sent to me for class, some of them had what begging the question, had a false analogy. I mean, I gave you examples of things that were wrong and I asked you to rewrite them. And we'll talk about some of those fallacies today. So let's get to it. Here is a great little YouTube video that we're not going to watch right now. You could watch on your own. It should give you an idea beyond me to get an idea of what fallacies are. Okay, first fallacy, begging the question. So this basically, and I was just saying this, the student actually used this in class, occurs when an argument's premise assumes the truth of the conclusion rather than supporting it. I'm going to give you a couple examples. So basically, you're trying to prove your assertion by repeating what you said just in a different way. Okay, I'm going to say it again. You're trying to prove whatever your claim is by concluding in a repetitive way, repeating the essence of what you said in a different way in the conclusion. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple examples. So an example would be, American products are superior to Japanese products because they are comparatively better. Do you see how that's saying the same thing? American products are superior to Japanese products because they are comparatively better. It said nothing. That's begging the question. It said nothing. It already said they're superior, and then they said they're comparatively better. It's saying the same thing. Okay, so that's an example of begging the question. This is really good if you can avoid it in your speeches, and you can figure it out when you hear people do it in their own arguments. Here's another example. And by the way, these are not my ideas. I'm pulling from my argumentation textbook that I used to teach argumentation with. So I just have to give credit where credit's due. It's from Fletcher and Scott. Skydiving is dangerous because it is unsafe. It's like that said nothing. You could have just left it at skydiving is dangerous. Well, the word dangerous and unsafe mean the same thing. Billy is right because he's never wrong. I bet you've heard that. You probably heard one of your parents say that. I'm right because I'm never wrong. Begging the question. Now be careful if you go to your parents and say, Mom, Dad, that's called a fallacy, begging the question. I learned that in Miss Brennan's class. They might not like that. But I want to support you in doing that. Actually, I want to support you in calling out people's fallacies. Maybe not to your parents, but to somebody. Okay, so that should kind of help you. It'd be like when some of you said, God exists because everyone believes in God. Or, I don't know, that's a good example, but some of you had them. Here it is. God exists because no one's proved he hasn't. How is that anything? How's it, what? Right? How's that? No one's proved God hasn't. It's the same thing. You're just saying it in the negative, right? Just think about that. Some of you had that. Okay, that fallacy. See if I have one here. So in other words, let's go back to, in other words, you assume without proof the assertion in position, whatever that you're holding. Bandwagoning. I love this one. I love this one because it happens all the time, right? It's an argument that utilizes unsubstantiated, right? So it hasn't been proven, a general opinion on a false basis. So here's a great example. Polls show that more than 80% of people want certain books banned in the schools. We need censorship now. First of all, what's wrong with this? Okay, what's wrong with this? Polls show, who are these polls? What polls? A poll that was taken on Facebook of 15 people? Is that how you got your 80%? And there's a lot of questions to be asked, but it says polls show that more than 80% of American people want certain books banned in schools. Okay, we have to ask what polls. And just because of this poll, the 80% of this, more than 80% of this poll, that they want books banned, doesn't mean that they should be banned. What's the reasoning? Who's getting polled? Is it a particular population? There's a lot of questions to be asked. So it's not a reason to have censorship. So again, think about that. Getting on the bandwagon means just going along with falling fads or current trends. Example would be everyone lost 20 pounds in this diet, so anyone who wants to lose weight should get on this diet. That's again making a great assumption. Not everybody loses weight, right? This is where we look at the erroneous reasoning, right? These assumptions that are there that aren't true. Okay, how are we doing on time? All right. Either or bifurcation. This is really easy. When someone gives you, says there's only two ways to do things, right? There's only two alternatives. An argument stated as being having only two alternatives, even when you know there's additional options. Anytime a person says you can either do this, that, or that, chances are that's fallacious reasoning. Because generally, there's always more than two options. There's always more than two options, okay, in an argument. So if someone says, if you're either going to go this way or that way, that's fallacious. Think about that. Ad hominem. I'll put President Trump here. Poor President Trump is really under the gun these days right now. But he gets attacked all the time. Now, he brings it on himself, but sometimes he's really, really picked on. And there are assumptions. An ad hominem attack is using someone's character to discredit what they're saying. Okay? An argument that targets a person instead of an issue with an intention to incite the audience to dislike that person. He's not the only one that's been the target of an ad hominem attack. Every president has been. But he in particular, again, I think he brings it on himself, but that's just my opinion, which is worth 25 cents. But it's still, there's a lot of, it can end up being fallacious reasoning just because you're focusing on that rather on the person instead of looking at what they're saying. Okay, let me see if I can give you any examples of ad hominem attacks. Actually, I think that's pretty obvious, right? Ad hominem is when you're really focusing on the person rather than. Here's the thing about ad hominem, and I'm just going to add, it looks like my talk is going to go in more two lectures, is that sometimes it's true. Like I was reading in my argumentation textbook about the example of with Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. A lot of you weren't even born yet when this happened, but you probably know of the story. So he was called to be impeached because of his behavior in the White House. And a lot of people hominem because they were attacking his character, which said that shouldn't be a statement about his ability to be president. So we have to really think of when is it that, and when is character a part of it? You know, isn't someone's character important to consider when acting as the leader of a country? Or should they be separated? And you kind of have to weigh that yourself, right? You have to weigh, you have to decide. That comes back to your own moral values. And I'm making this murky for a reason because I don't think is it self-explanatory in terms of fallacies as other fallacies are. So I just kind of want you to be aware of that. If you're going to assert this is an ad hominem fallacy, then you're going to want to really be sure of why you're saying that and on what basis you're saying that. Like, how do you prove that? A couple more minutes. Okay, red herring. Here's a good one. So red herring basically focuses on, when you make an argument, the focus is on something are relevant and you're just trying to distract the listener. And I want to give you an example of that. Just find something right here. Okay. So you're just, when in an argument, you're trying to people from the real issue. Here's an example. Okay. Let's say you're having a debate on whether the minimum wage should be increased. And one of the reasons why you say that, that you bring up the fact that while you're having that debate, you're debating whether the minimum wage should be increased. And then you bring up the issue of welfare fraud, okay, by the poor, and relate that to the minimum wage. Those are two separate topics, right? Two separate topics. So let's say you're talking about, I'll give you a good one since I know a little bit about this. So as a result of 9/11, we had the Patriot Act, we're just talking about that. And we looked at terrorism and we look at domestic terrorism. Oftentimes people that are environmental activists get labeled, especially if they're kind of radical about their actions. Maybe have destroyed property, usually even in the nonviolent, they're seen as environmental, as domestic terrorists, which is like, again, it's like a red herring because what they're doing is trying to protect the environment, but they're not doing anything to terrorize anyone. Now, there are rules of environmental radical environmentalists that do that, but in generally speaking, a lot of times they get labeled as eco-terrorists when they're not doing anything. The idea of terrorism is to make people afraid, and that's not their act. Their act is to make people aware. So that's like a red herring fallacy. We're going to stop there because that's at 15 minutes and we'll keep going. Okay, I'll see you again.